New York City, January. Steam twisting out of manholes, the whole street cast in dirty orange from sodium lights, ice rimming the edges of everything. The city sounded tired, sirens bouncing down Fifth, car horns blaring, a man somewhere in the shadows muttering to himself. But for Jason Reed, 17, it all blurred into a constant low growl, as familiar as hunger. His world fit in a torn backpack and a harmonica that used to belong to his dad. That night, Jason had been searching, again, for someplace out of the wind, someplace where the drunks wouldn't mess with him, where the cops wouldn't kick him awake and tell him to move along. He had a spot behind the Quick Mart off 47th, next to a dumpster that always steamed in the cold. It wasn't much, but the air was still. And sometimes he found half-warm pastries in the trash if he got lucky. Tonight, though, the alley wasn't empty. Jason almost missed it, a shape curled up by the trash can, black and tan, ribs sharp under a mangy coat. A dog. No collar, no tags, just a pair of tired amber eyes peering up at him, so much wariness and hurt in them that for a second Jason felt it echo in his own bones. The dog shivered so hard his nails scraped the concrete. Jason paused, his own breath clouding. "Hey, buddy, you're colder than me, huh?" He looked at the frayed old blanket slung over his shoulder. It was all he had for warmth, but the dog's sides heaved, each inhale jagged and wet. Jason knelt, slow. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, just watched him, like he was waiting to see if this stranger would hit or help. Jason hated that look. He'd seen it in mirrors, in subway windows, in the eyes of everyone who'd ever lived a little too long without safety. He wrapped the blanket around the trembling dog. Up close, he saw the animal's scars, one above the paw, another fading over his shoulder. "You're a fighter," Jason whispered. "Or just real unlucky." The dog flinched when Jason's fingers brushed his side, but he didn't snap. Jason settled next to him, pressing his own back against the wall, feeling the bitter chill sink in deeper. It was the kind of cold that crept into your teeth, numbed your heart. But the dog was warm, barely, but enough. He tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Guess we're both stuck out here, huh? For a long time, neither of them moved. A subway train rattled underground, shaking loose dirt from the bricks above. Jason listened to the dog's breath, uneven but alive. He tried to pretend the blanket was big enough for both. When sleep finally came, it was uneasy, full of dreams about a house he'd lost, his mother's laughter in the kitchen, and a time before everything got so complicated. The dog pressed closer, and in the drifting space between waking and dreaming, Jason realized it was the first time in months he hadn't felt completely alone. But nothing in New York stayed peaceful for long. It's in the gray hour before dawn, footsteps crunched on the frost outside the alley. Jason stirred, tightening his arm around the bundle of fur beside him. For a moment, he wondered if he should move, find another place, stay invisible. The city wasn't kind to people like him, but exhaustion won. He closed his eyes again, the harmonica cold in his pocket, the dog's warmth against his side, his only comfort. In the dark, with the city humming on, and the world still turning, two strays huddled together, each finding a sliver of hope in the other's brokenness. Jason awoke to the harsh scrape of a garbage truck somewhere down the block, the world frosted in a bluish morning haze. His back ached from the concrete, but he barely noticed. What caught him was the steady warmth against his side, a quiet, wary heartbeat, steady and insistent. He cracked an eye and saw the German Shepherd was still there, blanket tangled around both of them. For a minute, Jason half expected the dog to have bolted, disappeared into the night like everyone else ever had. But the animal just lay there, head propped on its paws, eyes tracking Jason's every move. He sat up, the blanket slipping off his shoulders. The cold bit hard, and his stomach twisted with hunger. Jason dug through his backpack, pulling out a battered granola bar, his last one. He broke it in half. "Breakfast," he said, voice scratchy. The dog looked at him, hesitated, and then gently took the offered piece from his palm. Jason watched the dog's ribs expand with each bite, as if chewing itself was a risk, A gamble. He smiled, for the first time in days. You eat like you haven't had a meal in weeks. I get it, man. He glanced at the dog's fur, matted and dirty, but clearly German shepherd, black saddle, tan legs, powerful frame beneath the grime. You need a name, Jason mused aloud, and I need a friend. He paused, searching for the right word, something that fit the way the dog seemed to melt into shadows. Always half a step behind or ahead. Shadow, he decided. Yeah, that works for you. Shadow's ears perked up at the name. Or maybe at the tone. Jason couldn't tell. But the connection felt real. As if, in that moment, the city's hard edge softened just a fraction. They left the alley as the morning crowds began to fill the streets, drifting between office workers and tourists, weaving through the chaos. Jason stuck to the edges, head down, moving with purpose. He'd learned all the best places to busk in the city. Central Park's south entrance was a favorite, especially on cold days when the wind funneled warmth from passing crowds. He settled on a corner bench and pulled out his harmonica. Shadow sat at his feet, ears twitching, eyes alert but relaxed. Jason started to play, a slow, bluesy tune his father used to whistle. The notes drifted over the concrete, low and searching, as people hurried by. At first, no one stopped. Jason was used to that. But then a woman with a puffy, red jacket slowed, tugging her daughter's arm. Look, honey, the doggie's listening. The girl smiled, wide-eyed, as Shadow tilted his head, a picture of alertness and loyalty. A few coins clinked into the open harmonica case. Jason's heart gave a small leap. He hadn't expected much, but it seemed, somehow, that the dog made people notice. A man in a suit paused, dropped $1, and nodded toward Shadow. Good-looking dog, he said, voice kind. All morning, Jason played. Every time he paused, Shadow nudged his hand, insistent, as if to say, keep going. By noon, there were enough coins for something more than stale pastries. A real meal. Jason felt a strange swell of gratitude, a warmth that had nothing to do with food or shelter. They spent the afternoon walking the city, Shadow never straying far. At a convenience store, Jason bought a small sandwich, then found a spot on the curb. He unwrapped the sandwich, split it evenly, and handed half to Shadow. The dog licked his fingers, tail sweeping the sidewalk. Jason laughed. Guess we're partners now? As the sun dipped low, the city took on a different shade. The wind grew sharper, and the sky turned a bruised purple. Jason thought about the shelters, places he'd sometimes gone when he couldn't stand the cold, but almost all of them had a rule: no pets. He stared at Shadow, who looked back with unwavering loyalty. The decision was easy. We'll find someplace else, Jason whispered. They wandered the twilight, seeking pockets of warmth, open stairwells, half-finished construction sites, alleys where the wind didn't bite so hard. In each place, Jason checked for trouble before settling. But wherever he went, Shadow followed, padding silently, never out of reach. Night fell fully, and the streets emptied. Jason curled up in a doorway behind an old brownstone. Shadow pressed close. He pulled the blanket around both of them, feeling the dog's heartbeat steady and sure. He closed his eyes, exhaustion rolling over him. You're all I've got now, he whispered, his words nearly swallowed by the city's hum. Don't go disappearing on me, okay? Shadow didn't answer, but Jason felt the dog's breath warm on his cheek. A quiet promise, fragile but real. Before he drifted off, Jason thought about the day. The coins, the smiles, the way people seemed to see him differently now that he had a dog at his side. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. Whether Shadow would stick with him, whether things might change, even just a little. But for tonight, with the dog curled tight against his chest and the world hushed around them, Jason felt something he hadn't in a long time. A thin, flickering hope, like the distant gleam of city lights through a winter fog. He slept, dreaming of warmth, of laughter, of a home that wasn't just a memory. The days in New York City fell into a rough, unsteady rhythm. Never soft, never simple, but something Jason could follow. Each morning, he and Shadow woke before dawn, limbs stiff from sleeping on cold stone, faces pinched and tired from restless dreams. Yet, every time Jason opened his eyes and saw the dog curled up close, a strange, small peace grounded him. He was no longer invisible. He was someone Shadow chose, again and again. Jason learned quickly which corners were safest and which ones to avoid. He knew which subway grates blew the warmest air and which police officers might look the other way as he and Shadow drifted through Midtown. Most days, he started at the south entrance to Central Park, harmonica in hand, Shadow at his feet, ears up, tail wagging whenever a child pointed or a passerby offered a half smile. The presence of the dog made a difference. People noticed. Sometimes they stopped. Sometimes they gave. Shadow had a kind of charisma Jason didn't understand. It wasn't just the way the dog sat alert, eyes bright and attentive, but the quiet trust he projected, so rare, so precious in a city of millions. A man with sharp features and a heavy coat once tossed Jason a $5 bill and asked, "Is he yours?" Jason only nodded. He didn't know how to explain it. They belonged to each other in a way that needed no words. As days bled into nights, Jason mapped the city's patterns. He avoided shelters with the big, "No pets allowed" signs. He'd spent a few bitter, lonely nights inside, always haunted by the memory of Shadow shivering in an alley somewhere, waiting. The choice was simple: freeze together, or sleep warm and alone. Jason chose the cold. He grew skilled at spotting places to hide, unlocked stairwells, cardboard kingdoms behind grocery stores, the shadowed corners of construction sites where workers sometimes left out old tarps and boards. He watched for the janitors who let him sleep in boiler rooms, the security guards who sometimes pretended not to see him, and the other homeless who drifted through, faces wary, never stopping long enough to say a real hello. At first, he tried to greet them, to trade stories, but most looked right through him. He understood. Trust cost too much in their world. Some nights he caught himself playing the harmonica just for Shadow, soft melodies in the dark, the kind his mother used to hum when he was small. The dog would listen, head cocked, tail beating a gentle rhythm on the dirty floor. Sometimes Jason wondered if Shadow remembered a life before all this. A home, a family, a real bed. On Fridays, the soup kitchen at St. Andrews handed out steaming bowls of chili and thick slices of bread. Jason waited in line with the others, cold biting at his fingers, stomach gnawing at itself. But when he reached the front, the volunteer pointed at Shadow and shook her head. "Sorry, no animals inside." Jason hesitated, bread so close he could almost taste it. Shadow gazed up at him, ears drooping, body tense. Jason forced a smile. "It's okay, boy. We'll find something else." He turned away, hunger clawing at his insides, but he didn't look back. He couldn't. He knew if he left Shadow behind, even for a moment, he'd be betraying something sacred. They spent that night in a stairwell of a half-finished apartment complex. The wind whistled through the open floors, but at least there was shelter from the sleet. Jason tore open a package of crackers he'd found at the bottom of his pack. He fed half to Shadow, breaking them into careful pieces. The dog ate slowly, licking crumbs from Jason's palm. In the dark, Jason whispered, "You're all I've got now." He remembered his father's voice, rough and tired after long days. "You take care of what you love, no matter what." Jason wondered if his father would be proud of him for staying loyal, or angry at him for being too stubborn to accept help. Winter dragged on, days growing shorter, city lights burning through the dusk. Jason's jacket, once thick and sturdy, now barely kept the cold at bay. He wrapped Shadow in the blanket every night, shivering beside him. Sometimes he pressed his ear to the dog's side, listening to the heartbeat, the simple reminder that he wasn't alone. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench, a group of kids ran past, tossing snowballs. One of the smaller boys stopped, staring at Shadow. "Is he a police dog?" he asked, wide-eyed. Jason smiled. "He might have been. He's the bravest dog I know." The boy reached out, hesitated. Shadow, sensing the boy's uncertainty, licked his hand with a slow, gentle swipe. The boy giggled. "He likes me." "Yeah," Jason said. "He's good at that." For a moment, he imagined what it would be like to belong somewhere, to have a little brother, to eat dinner at a real table. The feeling faded quickly, replaced by the familiar ache of longing, but it left a mark, a tiny ember glowing in the ashes. Some nights were worse than others. Sometimes the cops rousted them, shined flashlights in their faces, told them to move along. Once, a group of college kids stumbled past, laughing, tossing beer cans at Jason's feet. Shadow growled low, the sound sharp and dangerous. The kids backed off, muttering, and Jason reached out, pressing a trembling hand to Shadow's fur. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're okay." Each day, Jason and Shadow carved out a life at the city's margins, a life measured in coins and kindness, in scraps and small mercies. They survived by watching each other's backs, by refusing to let go, even when the world told them it would be easier to give up. And yet, as February crept closer and the nights grew longer, Jason found himself daring, just barely, to believe that maybe, just maybe, something better might be waiting on the other side of winter. He saw it in the way Shadow's eyes met his, steady and unafraid. He heard it in the music that drifted from his harmonica, in the laughter of strangers, in the rare, fleeting warmth of human connection. No one could predict what the next day would bring. But as long as they had each other, Jason knew he could keep moving forward. He'd learned that in a city of millions, sometimes the only family you had was the one you found in the shadows. The one that stayed, no matter what. New York could feel safe and dangerous at the same time. Sometimes the city wrapped itself around Jason and Shadow with the hush of distant sirens and the low thrum of traffic, just a noise, familiar, almost a comfort. But danger didn't announce itself in shouts. It crept up, sharp and sudden, when you were most tired, most cold, most sure you could make it one more night. That Thursday night, the city was glazed with ice. Freezing rain clung to every fire escape and mailbox, casting prismatic halos around the streetlights. Jason and Shadow found a sheltered alcove behind an abandoned laundromat, out of sight, away from the wind. Shadow curled close, head on Jason's chest, sharing what little warmth they could find. Jason tried to sleep, humming a slow tune, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The alley felt too quiet. Every shadow stretched long and sharp. He kept one hand on his harmonica, another resting on Shadow's scruff. Even the dog seemed tense, ears twitching, head lifting every time footsteps echoed from the street. Just after midnight, the scrape of sneakers cut through the silence. Jason's eyes snapped open. Shadow lifted his head, growling low in his chest. 3 silhouettes stepped out from the darkness, older teens, faces half hidden by hoodies and the kind of anger Jason knew too well. One of them, tall, lean, with a scar slashing through his eyebrow, blocked the narrow exit. "Hey, man," he sneered, voice oily. "Heard you made some money today." Jason's fingers tightened around his pack. "Not much. Just trying to sleep." The second boy, heavier, moved closer. "Let's see what you got. Hand it over." Jason shook his head. He'd learned when to give in, when to push back. Tonight, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was Shadow, pressed close. But he felt something inside as re-harden. "Just leave us alone." The third boy, silent until now, bent to snatch Jason's bag. Shadow lunged, fast, teeth bared, a wild, furious sound ripping from his throat. The teens jumped back, but Scar Eyebrow had a pipe, rusted and heavy. He swung. It happened all at once. The pipe connected with Shadow's side, a sickening thud, a yelp slicing the night. Jason screamed, diving to shield the dog, his arms flung wide. He felt a blow glance off his shoulder, then another. Pain sharp, white hot. Shadow, dazed, still snapped and snarled, refusing to back down. The air filled with curses, boots stomping, the echo of steel against bone. Somewhere in the chaos, Jason heard a voice, older, furious, slicing through the panic like a blade. "Hey, get away from them!" The attackers froze, glancing at each other, fear suddenly blooming in their eyes. Jason, half blind with pain, looked up to see a woman at the alley's edge. A shock of white hair, fierce eyes, a cane held like a weapon. She didn't hesitate. She advanced, brandishing the cane, her stance wide and certain. You boys want to see what happens next? She barked. The teens hesitated, then scattered, one glancing back, cursing under his breath. The alley fell silent except for Jason's ragged breathing and Shadow's whimpers. The woman knelt beside them. Her coat was battered, boots caked in city salt. She pushed the hood from her face, revealing deep lines and intensity that cut through the night. You all right, son? Jason tried to answer, but his throat was raw. He's hurt, he managed, gesturing to Shadow. She reached out, hands surprisingly gentle. Let me see. Her fingers traced the dog's ribs, stopping at the fresh, swelling wound where the pipe had struck. Her hands trembled, not from fear, Jason sensed, but from something older, deeper. She whispered, almost to herself, You look just like Orion. Jason blinked, confused, his mind fuzzy from adrenaline and pain. Who's Orion? She shook her head, eyes wet. Never mind that for now. We need to get him somewhere warm. Her gaze was sharp, commanding. Can you stand? Jason nodded, teeth clenched. He tried to rise, staggering, but the woman braced him with her free arm. Together, they lifted Shadow, who whimpered but didn't fight. Every step out of the alley was a struggle, Jason's limbs burning, Shadow limp with shock, the woman's cane clicking a steady rhythm. They reached the sidewalk, icy and deserted. The woman hailed a cab with the authority of someone who'd seen too many nights like this. The cabbie hesitated at the sight of the bleeding dog, but she pressed a bill into his hand and growled, Animal Rescue Center, Uptown, now. Inside the cab, Jason cradled Shadow's head, whispering nonsense, promises, apologies, whatever hope he could find. The woman rode up front, back ramrod straight, silent except for the occasional glance in the mirror. The city blurred past, block after block of frozen lights, shuttered windows, memories. As the cab rolled to a stop outside a low-slung building marked Caldwell Animal Rescue, the woman turned, her face softening. Come on, son, let's get him fixed up. Jason staggered out, numb and shivering. The woman led them inside, past rows of cages and the sharp scent of antiseptic and wet fur. A sleepy-looking vet emerged from a back room, eyes widening at the sight of Shadow's wounds. Take care of him, the woman commanded. I'll stay with the boy. Jason slumped onto a bench, shaking. The adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion and something like relief. The woman sat beside him, her cane resting across her knees. You did good, she murmured. Not many would stand their ground for a dog. Jason stared at his scraped hands, unsure how to respond. He wanted to ask who she was, why she'd risk herself for 2 strays. But all that came out was, Thank you. She smiled, tired but proud. Name's Margaret Caldwell. I used to handle K9ians. Saw you and your dog around the neighborhood. Figured you could use a friend. Jason swallowed, tears prickling his eyes. For the first time in months, he felt seen. Truly seen, not just as another face in the city's blur, but as a person. He looked at the door where Shadow had disappeared, heart pounding. You saved us, he whispered. Margaret squeezed his shoulder. Sometimes. We save each other. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere, a dog barked. A sharp, hopeful sound in the night. For Jason, battered and aching, it sounded like the start of something new. Jason sat on the plastic bench inside the Caldwell Animal Rescue lobby, hands trembling, dried blood under his nails. The white fluorescent lights hummed above, harsh and constant, making his eyes ache. Outside, the city still howled, but in here, there was only the muffled shuffle of paws and Margaret Caldwell's steady, reassuring presence. She paced the hallway with her cane tapping a soft, rhythmic beat, an anchor in the chaos. He wanted to follow Shadow, to make sure the dog was really okay, but the vet had ushered him away. We'll do what we can. Just sit tight. That had been half an hour ago. Maybe more. Time inched by, thick with worry and exhaustion. Jason's mind spun with every what-if, every memory of Shadow's yelp echoing in the alley. Margaret broke the silence first. She sat down beside Jason, laying her cane across her lap. Her hands were knotted with age, the knuckles big and swollen, but her grip was steady. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't pepper him with questions. And instead, she leaned back and let out a long sigh, eyes closed as if gathering herself. Finally, she spoke. You know, I used to work with dogs, just like yours. The K9 unit, NYPD, lost count of how many times one of them saved my skin. Jason glanced over, surprised by the softness in her voice. You train police dogs. She nodded, gaze distant. The best and the bravest. My last partner, his name was Orion. Black and tan, too. Had a scar above his paw. Right here. She pointed, her eyes glistening. He was fierce, stubborn, but loyal to the bone. Reminds me a lot of your friend. Jason hesitated. Shadow's not really mine. He just found me. I didn't even have a name for him until yesterday. Margaret smiled, slow and knowing. Sometimes dogs do the choosing. Not the other way around? A pause hung between them, heavy with memories. Margaret shifted in her seat, the cane thumping once. I saw you both a few times. Around the park. Always together. That dog would never let you out of his sight. You must have done something right. Jason shrugged, unsure what to say. I just shared what I had. Blanket, food. He's all I got now. Margaret studied him for a long moment. There was something fierce in her gaze. Pride, perhaps, or understanding. You did more than share, kid. You gave him a reason to stay. The door at the end of the hall opened. The vet appeared, tall, thin, with tired eyes behind thick glasses. Jason sprang to his feet, heart pounding. Is he? He'll be okay. The vet interrupted, his voice soft but certain. Bruised ribs, but no fractures. He's tough, needs rest, antibiotics. He's in good hands. Relief crashed over Jason, so sudden he almost staggered. Margaret squeezed his arm, her grip like steel. See? Fighters, both of you. They followed the vet down the hall, past rows of kennels. Most of the dogs barked and leaped at the sight of strangers, but Shadow was quiet. He lay on a clean blanket in a small cage, a fresh bandage around his side, eyes fixed on the door. When Jason entered, Shadow's ears perked and his tail thumped against the metal floor. Jason dropped to his knees, reaching through the bars. Shadow pressed his nose against Jason's hand, eyes shining with trust. Hey, buddy, Jason whispered. I'm here. You're okay. Margaret watched from the doorway, arms crossed. There was a softness in her face, a sadness, too, that seemed deeper than the wrinkles at her eyes. You know, she said, I haven't seen a dog respond like that since Orion. Jason looked up. What happened to him? Margaret swallowed. Lost him a couple winters back. Cancer. Never really felt right after that. I kept this place running, but it's not the same without him. She stepped closer, kneeling beside Jason. Her voice grew almost a whisper. When I saw your dog tonight, the way he fought for you, I swear, for a second, I thought I saw a ghost. Jason was quiet, stroking Shadow's fur. He saved me more times than I can count. I don't think I'd be here without him. Margaret nodded. And you saved him too. Dogs know, you know. They remember who showed them kindness. For a while, they sat together in the hush of the rescue center, the only sound the distant whine of city traffic and the soft, steady breath of the German shepherd. Later, Margaret showed Jason around the shelter. She pointed out the other rescues. Pit bulls, mutts, tiny dogs with big personalities, all with stories of loss and survival. She introduced him to the night staff, who eyed him with gentle curiosity but didn't ask why he was there. It was as if, in this place, everyone understood what it meant to be a stray. Before Jason returned to Shadow's side, Margaret pressed a mug of hot tea into his hands. Drink. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Jason sipped, the heat filling him, pushing back the cold that had become a part of his bones. For the first time in months, he felt something like hope. Fragile, uncertain, but there. Margaret lingered beside him as he sat on the floor next to Shadow's kennel. She hesitated, then reached out to scratch the dog's ear. Shadow's eyes fluttered shut in contentment. You're good for each other, she said quietly. Maybe that's what you both needed. Jason looked up, voice trembling. Uh, do you think, do you think we could stay here just for a while? Margaret studied him, searching his face for something. Desperation, sincerity, maybe a flicker of trust. Finally, she nodded. We'll find a way. You two deserve a break. Shadow shifted, pressing his nose into Jason's hand, as if to say thank you in a language deeper than words. That night, as the storm raged outside and the world spun on, Jason slept beside Shadow, a thin blanket shared between them. Margaret watched over them both, a woman with a cane and a heart battered by loss, daring herself to hope just once more. And in the stillness of the shelter, a new kind of family began to form, not by blood, but by choice, by kindness, and by the simple, unbreakable loyalty of a boy and his dog. Jason woke with a start, blinking in the half-light of the animal rescue center. The world outside was still gray and cold, but inside the air was heavy with the scent of disinfectant, dog fur, and faint hope. He stretched his sore limbs, blanket pooled at his feet. Shadow lay beside him, head on his paws, chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Bandages wrapped his side, but the worst of the pain seemed to have ebbed away. For a moment, Jason forgot where he was. He listened to the muffled barks, the shuffle of paws in kennels, and the muted clink of a metal food bowl down the hall. Then memory swept over him. The attack. Margaret's fierce rescue. Shadow's desperate growl. He ran his hand along Shadow's neck, murmuring softly, "You're safe. We both are." Margaret appeared in the doorway, cane tapping a gentle warning. She wore the same battered parka, her silver hair braided back, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Sleep any?" she asked, her voice soft. Jason nodded, stifling a yawn. "Yeah, thanks." She set a tray down on a small table, toast, scrambled eggs, a cup of instant coffee. "Eat. Your skin and bones." Jason hesitated. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him. He offered the first bite to Shadow, who ate gingerly, then devoured the rest. Margaret sat across from Jason, studying the pair. "You know, I keep thinking about last night, about that scar on Shadow's paw. Mind if I take a look?" Jason nodded, unsure. He coaxed Shadow to roll onto his side, revealing the small, faded scar above his left paw. Margaret leaned in, breath catching. "Back, two," she said suddenly, voice strong, almost a command. To Jason's shock, Shadow responded. His ears pricked, body tensed, and he scooted backward exactly 2 paces, coming to attention with military precision. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her cane slipping to the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice trembling. "It really is him." Jason stared. "What do you mean? Who is he?" Margaret swallowed hard, eyes wet with memories. "Years ago, I trained a K9 named Orion. Best dog I ever had. Maybe the best on the force. He was stolen during a break-in at the rescue. We searched for weeks. Nothing. I thought he was gone forever. That scar," she pointed, hand shaking. "In that command? Only Orion would know." Jason felt his throat tighten. "You're saying Shadow is your dog?" She reached out, not to take, but to touch Shadow's fur, gently, reverently. "Maybe he is, but dogs choose who they stay with. He's been with you all this time. He saved you, didn't he?" Jason nodded, suddenly terrified that Margaret would take Shadow away. You're not going to take him, are you?" Margaret shook her head, her expression fierce. "Not unless he wants to go. And it looks like he already chose. That's what matters. You're his person now." A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighty, full of everything left unsaid. Jason tried to picture what Shadow, Orion, had seen, what he'd survived. He thought about all the nights they'd kept each other alive. Something in him broke open, a flood of relief and gratitude and sorrow. "Oh," Margaret gathered herself. her composure slowly returning. Maybe we can give him a new chapter, both of you. The vet came in, smiling. Your dog's a legend, she said, checking Shadow's bandage. Handled the exam like a pro. He's healing fast. Should be up and around in no time. Jason nodded, relief loosening the knot in his chest. Can I stay with him? Just until he's better. Margaret's eyes softened. You both can stay as long as you need. The day passed in a gentle routine. Jason fed Shadow, helped clean the kennels, and listened to Margaret share stories of her old canine days. High-speed chases, missing children found, triumphs and heartbreaks that etched lines into her face. She spoke of Orion like family, not property. She never once treated Jason as a burden, only as a part of the story. When evening fell, Margaret found Jason sitting on the back steps. Shadow sprawled at his feet. She joined him, the city lights twinkling in the distance. You ever think about school? She asked. Jason shrugged, embarrassed. Dropped out when I lost my mom. Been on the streets since. Margaret didn't flinch or judge. You're smart, resourceful. Ever think about finishing? He hesitated. The idea felt too big, too far away. I wouldn't know where to start. You start here, Margaret said. You help out. You rest. When you're ready, we'll get you set up to study. I'll help. Jason stared at her, searching for a catch, but there was only patience and stubborn hope. He glanced down at Shadow, who nudged his knee with a cold nose, eyes shining. Margaret squeezed his shoulder. You've both been through enough. Time to build something new. That night, as Jason settled into a borrowed bed, Shadow curled beside him. He let the safety sink in. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of the city, and the even breath of the dog at his side. For the first time, he didn't worry about being alone or unseen. He let himself believe in the possibility of another chance. In the dark, Margaret's voice echoed in his mind. Not unless he wants to go. And it looks like he already chose. Jason whispered to Shadow, wherever you go, I go too. Shadow's tail thumped softly as if in answer, and together they drifted into the quiet promise of sleep. For the first time in months, Jason slept the whole night through. No alarms, no shouts in the dark, no boots kicking him awake. When he opened his eyes, morning light filtered through the blinds, painting wide gold stripes across the unfamiliar ceiling. For a long moment, Jason just lay there. Warm, safe, Shadow's weight pressed against his feet at the end of the narrow bed. It took time for the details to sink in. The clean sheets, the simple dresser with a chipped white lamp, the window looking out onto a skinny stretch of backyard, bare branches tapping the glass. He couldn't remember the last time he'd woken up anywhere that didn't smell like wet cardboard or street salt. Shadow stirred, yawning, tail sweeping the covers. Jason smiled and scratched behind his ears. We made it, huh? In the kitchen, the clatter of mugs and the low buzz of a radio told him someone else was up. He sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his bones, a soreness that somehow felt different now. More like proof of survival than a warning. He found clean clothes folded on a chair. A worn sweatshirt, jeans just his size, thick socks. He pulled them on, feeling almost like he was stepping into another life. Down the hall, Margaret was pouring coffee, steam rising in curls. She glanced up as Jason entered, her eyes bright but not intrusive. Sleep all right? Yeah, Jason said, surprised by how shy his voice sounded in the quiet. Better than I have in a long time. She set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table, gesturing for him to sit. Shadow patted over and flopped at Jason's feet. Always close, always watching. Jason ate slowly, savoring each bite, the hot food filling him with a heaviness he welcomed. Margaret sat across from him, sipping her coffee. She didn't push, didn't ask questions about his past or his family. Instead, she talked about the rescue center, how every dog came with its own story, how some took months to trust, how others healed almost overnight with the right touch. People and dogs aren't so different, she said. Everyone needs a place they can feel safe. Jason nodded, the words settling into him. He finished eating, wiped his mouth on a napkin, and waited. For what? He wasn't sure. Maybe for her to say it was time to go. Instead, Margaret slid a ring of keys across the table. That's for your room and the back door. Only rules are clean up after yourself, help out when you can, and respect the animals. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. Jason stared at the keys, the metal cool and heavy in his palm. The weight was different from anything he'd carried before, less a burden, more a kind of an invitation. He looked up, searching her face for any sign of expectation or pity. He found only patience. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Margaret smiled, the lines around her mouth deepening. You don't have to say anything. You and Shadow belong here for as long as you need. The rest of the morning slipped by in quiet tasks. Jason helped carry in a delivery of dog food, hauling heavy bags through the back door, Shadow trotting at his side. He swept the kennel hallway, refilled water bowls, and learned the names of the rescue dogs: Peanut, Blaze, Daisy, Rufus, each with their own quirks, their own stories written in scars and wagging tails. There was work to be done everywhere. Jason didn't mind. He found himself wanting to help, wanting to make things easier for Margaret and the other volunteers. Every time he walked past his room and saw the bed, the clean sheets, the small lamp glowing by the window, a knot in his chest loosened. Margaret checked on him throughout the day, never hovering but always present. In the afternoon, she found him in the yard, tossing a squeaky ball for Shadow. She leaned on her cane, watching as the dog chased the ball with the clumsy enthusiasm of someone discovering joy for the first time. You ever done kennel work before? She asked. Jason shook his head. No, but I can learn. She nodded approvingly. Good, it's honest work. Hard but honest. Jason wiped sweat from his brow, watching as Shadow trotted back, ball clamped in his jaws. I'm not afraid of work, he said. That night, as the rescue center quieted and the city hummed in the distance, Jason sat at the small desk in his room, a plate of cookies and a glass of milk beside him. Margaret had left a GED study guide on the table. Just slid it across. No pressure, no speech. Jason flipped through the pages, words and equations blurring together. It felt overwhelming at first, but then Shadow nudged his elbow, dropping the squeaky ball into Jason's lap. Jason laughed, the sound echoing off the walls, surprising them both. Later, lying in bed, Jason stared at the ceiling, the keys on the nightstand glinting in the lamplight. For the first time, he let himself imagine a future. Not a perfect one, not free of struggle or pain, but a future that felt possible. One where he could stay, where he could build something new. He reached down to scratch Shadow's head. We're safe now, he whispered, more to himself than the dog. We can rest, Shadow huffed, rolling onto his back, legs kicking in a dream. Jason smiled, his chest tight with gratitude, hope, and the strange electric fear that came with believing in good things after so long in the dark. As he drifted off, Jason thought about all the choices that had led him here. Every night he'd chosen Shadow over a warm shelter, every moment he'd refused to give up, every tiny act of kindness that had pulled him one step closer to this new life. In the stillness, he let himself hope, truly hope, that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over, and the best was yet to come. The rhythm of rescue life grew into Jason's bones, gentle and persistent. Each morning began before the sun, the city outside still holding its breath. Inside the rescue center, the air was warmer, full of the sounds of waking dogs, Margaret's voice humming an old tune, and Shadow's paws scratching on the linoleum as he padded beside Jason. Routine took shape, sweeping kennels, cleaning water bowls, filling food dishes with precise scoops, and carrying bags of kibble twice his weight. It was hard work, but honest in a way nothing else had been. There were moments when Jason caught his reflection in the glass doors, thinner than he'd like, but standing tall, a sense of purpose straightening his shoulders. He began to move through the world like someone who belonged. Margaret was everywhere, checking inventory, organizing adoption events, teaching Jason about dog behavior and care. She handed him a notebook one afternoon filled with scribbled tips and encouragements. "Uh, For your studies," she said, eyes twinkling, "and for your stories. Write them down. You'll want to remember someday." Jason spent afternoons sitting at the small desk in his room, shadow stretched at his feet, the hum of the city muffled by thick walls. He tackled GED prep in small, stubborn bursts. Math problems, reading passages, essay prompts that felt impossibly big. Some nights he grew frustrated, the words tangling up or numbers slipping away, but Margaret would sit with him, patient, explaining and coaxing him forward. "You're not alone, kid," she reminded him. "It's not about being perfect. It's about trying again and again." Shadow became a fixture at Jason's side, not just as a companion, but as the rescue's unofficial ambassador. The dog's calm, steady presence eased the anxious, aggressive newcomers. Puppies who shook with fear at the back of their kennels slowly crept forward, drawn by Shadow's quiet confidence. Margaret began to let Jason help with training the most troubled dogs. He mimicked her steady voice, firm hand, patient heart. He discovered he was good at it. He learned when to use praise, when to wait in silence, how to coax a frightened dog into trust. Sometimes he caught himself smiling as a skittish pit bull finally wagged its tail, or a scrappy mutt curled up beside him on the cold concrete. There were setbacks, too. Dogs that bit, dogs that broke things, dogs that ran away or refused to eat. Margaret showed him how to take the failures in stride, how not to blame himself. "You keep showing up," she said. "That's what matters." Shadow, for his part, became the role model for the whole place. Margaret called him the professor, laughing as Shadow demonstrated commands for a roomful of awkward rescues, his tail wagging like a metronome. The longer Jason stayed, the more he saw the small miracles. An old dog finding a new home, a family reunited, a child's face lighting up with hope. He started to believe in second chances, not just for the dogs, but for himself. Outside, the seasons shifted. The first hints of spring softened the wind, tiny buds appearing on trees in the backyard. Jason took to walking the grounds in the evening, Shadow at his side. The world opening up after so many months closed tight. Sometimes Margaret joined them, her cane tapping a steady rhythm in the grass. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and city lights flickered awake, Jason and Margaret sat on the steps, Shadow's head in Jason's lap. Margaret sipped her tea and asked, "You ever think about what's next?" Jason hesitated, fingers twisting in Shadow's fur. "I guess I want to finish school. Maybe work with animals. Help kids like me, the ones who slip through the cracks." Margaret nodded, eyes far away. "You'd be good at that. You know what it's like to be lost. That matters." They sat in silence, listening to the city's heartbeat. Jason felt something shift in him, a door creaking open to possibility. That night, Margaret handed him a stack of flyers. "We're holding an outreach event next week. You'll be in charge of Shadow and the new arrivals. Think you're, up for it?" Jason swallowed his nerves, but nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." In the days that followed, Jason threw himself into preparations. Bathing dogs, practicing commands, making sure every kennel was spotless. He worked with Shadow, teaching him tricks to delight visitors, but also to help nervous rescues trust a little more each day. The morning of the event arrived bright and clear. The rescue center filled with families, volunteers, and children shrieking with laughter. Jason wore a fresh shirt Margaret had ironed for him, hair combed, face open and eager. Shadow trotted at his side, tail high. Jason found himself telling stories about Shadow, about life on the streets, about the first time he'd played harmonica in the park and earned enough for a meal. People listened, kids crowded close. Margaret watched from the edge of the room, pride shining in her eyes. As the sun set and the crowd thinned, Jason realized something had changed. He was no longer the boy hiding in alleyways, invisible and afraid. He was part of a place, part of a story, bigger than himself. That night, he sat at his desk, writing in the notebook Margaret had given him. Shadow dozed at his feet, sighing in his sleep. Jason wrote about trust, about small acts of kindness, about the courage it took to let hope in after a long winter. And when he finished, he closed the notebook, leaned back, and let gratitude fill the empty places inside him. For the first time, he believed, truly believed, that he belonged. On the morning of the outreach event, Jason woke before dawn, heart pounding with nerves and excitement. It had been months since the night Shadow found him behind the dumpster. Months since Margaret's cane had sent fear scattering into the dark. The rescue center had changed him in ways he hadn't yet found words for. But today, he'd have to try. He stood at the bathroom sink, splashing cold water on his face, rehearsing lines he'd practiced with Margaret. He wasn't a natural talker, never had been, but she'd said, "You don't have to perform. Just tell the truth. That's enough." Shadow hovered in the doorway, tail swishing, his eyes steady and calm, as if to say, "I'm here too." The event was set up out back, beneath the string lights Margaret and the volunteers had hung between the trees. There were tables piled high with flyers, kennels lined up like a hopeful parade, dogs in bandanas, and clusters of kids chasing each other across the lawn. Jason wore a plain blue t-shirt and jeans, hair neat, a little older than when he'd first stumbled into this place, but still marked by the city's edge. Margaret handed him a microphone as families started to gather. "When you're ready," she murmured, squeezing his shoulder. Jason knelt beside Shadow, fingers buried in the dog's fur, steadying himself. "Let's do this, huh?" Shadow pressed close, and Jason drew a breath, letting the air settle deep in his chest. The crowd quieted as he stepped forward. He stared out at the sea of faces, parents, children, volunteers, people who'd seen him only as the boy who cleaned kennels or walked dogs after dark. He felt the old instinct to disappear, to make himself small. But then he caught Margaret's eye in the back row, her smile unwavering, her belief holding him up. He began simply, "My name's Jason. Some of you know me from around here. A year ago, I didn't have a home. I didn't even have a plan. I had to get a harmonica and a blanket and a lot of empty nights." He paused, fingers tightening around Shadow's leash. "I met Shadow behind a convenience store, as we were both starving, freezing. I didn't know it then, but saving him saved me too. We kept each other alive." The air grew still as Jason continued, his voice raw but steady. "It's strange. The things you remember, the sound of the city at night, the bite of cold, the way it feels to have nothing left except the warmth of someone else who needs you. Some people say you save a rescue dog, but really they save you right back. You won't." He told the story of the alley, the attack, how Shadow stood between him and danger when nobody else would. How Margaret had arrived, cane swinging, and brought them into this strange, stubborn little family. He glanced at Margaret, saw her eyes shimmering. Margaret, she lost a dog once, Orion. Turns out, Shadow was her old partner from the canine days. But he chose to stay with me. She let him. That's how I knew this place was different. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Small gasps, glances exchanged. Jason smiled, a little bashful. You think you come here to help the dogs, but they help you back. They teach you how to trust, how to be patient, how to give somebody another chance." He shifted, scanning the faces before him. Kids wide-eyed, adults blinking away emotion. "I never thought I'd be standing here, talking to all of you. But Margaret gave me a job, gave me a room, a chance to finish school, and Shadow gave me the courage to take it." He knelt down, letting his hand rest on Shadow's head, the leash forgotten. He was her dog once, but he became mine when I had nothing and gave me back everything. Someone in the audience sniffed. A little girl reached out to pet Shadow as he ambled past, tail wagging gently. Jason saw in her face the same hesitant hope he'd felt that first night, a longing for connection, for something safe to hold on to. A volunteer led a nervous new rescue dog from the shelter, a scrawny mixed breed with scared, haunted eyes. The crowd parted, letting Jason approach. He crouched, laying a folded blanket in the grass, coaxing the dog close with gentle words and a steady hand. "You don't have to be afraid," Jason murmured. "You're safe now." He could feel everyone watching, expectant, moved. For a moment, Jason remembered the cold of that first night, the shivers he and Shadow had shared, the pain and hunger and fear. But mostly he remembered the turning point. A single act of kindness, shared warmth, a leap of faith in a world that so often demanded you keep your guard up. Margaret joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. She spoke softly, voice thick with pride. "This is what it's about. Not just the dogs. All of us, learning how to give. And how to let ourselves be given to." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere, rolling through the yard like a promise. Families began talking to volunteers about adoption. Children clustered around the dogs. The new rescue, trembling at first, crept closer to Shadow, drawn by the calm energy that only another survivor could offer. As dusk fell and the crowd drifted away, Jason found himself surrounded by the messy, beautiful evidence of change. Empty water bowls, tangled leashes, new friends exchanging numbers, children begging their parents for just one more visit. Margaret sat on the steps, watching the sun disappear behind the city skyline. Jason joined her, Shadow pressed between them. For a while, neither spoke. They just listened to the quiet, to the sounds of hope echoing in a place built by broken things mending together. Margaret finally broke the silence, her voice thick but steady. "You did good, kid." Jason looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not just the woman with a cane, but a mentor, a friend, the beating heart of a place that lets second chances bloom. He nodded, a small smile curling on his lips. "We all did." And as night crept in, Jason felt it again, a sense that his story was still unfolding, that the kindness he'd received was a gift he was now strong enough to pass on, one gentle act at a time. Night fell soft and wide over the city, the rescue center lights glowing like lanterns against the dark. Jason finished the last of his chores, stacking folded towels, sweeping stray bits of kibble from under the kennels, locking the back gate. The day's energy had ebbed away, leaving behind a kind of hush, a space for breath and quiet gratitude. Shadow trotted alongside him, moving with a new confidence, scars faded, coat gleaming under the hallway lights. The old ache in Jason's bones had faded too, replaced by something steadier. For so long his world had been about survival. Now, with every small act, feeding a frightened pup, changing water bowls, sharing a joke with a volunteer, he felt the beginnings of a different life, one shaped by belonging. Margaret waited in her office, a mug of tea warming her hands. She glanced up as Jason entered, a weary smile flickering at the edges of her mouth. "Long day?" He nodded, collapsing into the chair across from her. "The longest, and maybe the best." They sat together in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, dogs shifting in their crates, a heater humming. Outside, the city seemed far away, less of a threat and more like a world waiting to be rediscovered. Margaret broke the silence first. "You know, places like this, they don't last if people forget why they started. It's easy to close yourself off, to let hurt turn to stone. But you kept the door open. That matters, Jason. It really does." He looked at her, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "I don't know if I did much. I just stuck around." She smiled, shaking her head. "You let yourself be seen. You let yourself care. You gave back when you could have stayed angry. Most people never get that far." Jason was quiet, the words sinking deep. He thought of all the places he'd slept, all the times he'd run from kindness, afraid it would vanish or turn sharp. But here, with Margaret, with Shadow, with 100 little lives depending on him, he felt the circle closing. Not an end, but a coming home. A few nights later, a battered old pickup rolled to a stop outside the center. Jason watched from the doorway as a skinny, trembling mutt was coaxed out by a woman in a denim jacket. The dog flinched at every sound, ribs sharp beneath a patchy coat, eyes wide and wild. Jason stepped forward, moving slow. He remembered the first night he'd found Shadow, how easy it would have been to walk away, how everything had changed because he didn't. He knelt on the concrete, laying a folded, clean blanket in the far corner. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said softly, voice steady. He didn't rush the dog, just waited, letting his presence fill the space with patience. Shadow came over, tail low, ears forward, an ambassador, a quiet assurance. After a long minute, the mutt crept forward, nose twitching. Jason smiled, coaxing him close with a soft voice and an open palm. He glanced up at the woman, saw her relief, her hope. "We'll take care of him," Jason promised. "You did the right thing." Back inside, Jason sat on the floor, the new dog curled in a tight ball at his feet. Shadow pressed against his side. He watched the hallway fill with small, ordinary miracles. Dogs napping, volunteers laughing, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Margaret passed by, her cane clicking a soft rhythm on the tiles, her eyes proud and bright. As the night deepened, Jason found himself thinking of all the people who'd helped him. The soup kitchen worker, who'd slipped him an extra roll, the janitor who'd turned a blind eye, the stranger who'd given him his first $1. Margaret with her battered cane and big, unbreakable heart. He thought of every act of mercy, every moment when the world had been less cruel than it could have been. He remembered what it felt like to be alone, to have nothing, to think that no one would ever notice if he simply disappeared. But now he was part of something that mattered. He had Shadow, he had work, he had a future he could build with his own hands. As he turned off the last light and headed for bed, Jason paused in the quiet hallway, listening to the night. The rescue center, with all its noise and mess and love, felt more like home than any place he'd ever known. He knelt beside the mutt's kennel, tucking the blanket in a little tighter. "I gave him warmth once. He gave me a future. Now I get to do the same." The moon hung bright above the city, spilling silver through the windows. Jason lay down, shadow pressed against his legs, hope pulsing quietly in his chest. He closed his eyes, words echoing inside him. A promise, a prayer, a truth he'd earned the hard way. Kindness, once given, never truly ends. It just circles back, bigger, softer, stronger, voiceover. "I gave him warmth once. He gave me a future. Now I get to do the same."